"Don't expect me to obey you," native girl said after the cowboy bought her from the auction. Dry Hollow burned beneath the noon sun, every roof and soul covered in red dust. On a wooden platform in the square, an Apache girl stood bound at the wrists, hair matted with blood. Her gaze steady, despite the laughter that tore around her. "50 cents for the savage," someone shouted. The auctioneer smirked. "Any higher?" Then a low voice cut through the heat. $5. The crowd stilled. A man stepped forward, Rowan Doyle. Lean, trail-worn. His hat casting a shadow over eyes, cold as river stone. He set 5 silver coins on the table. "I'm not buying a person," he said slowly. "Just want this to stop." The girl lifted her chin, blood on her lip catching the light. "Don't expect me to obey you." Rowan met her eyes for a long, quiet moment. "I won't," he said. "That's not what I came for." The sun over Dry Hollow didn't shine. It scalded. Heat shimmered above the rooftops, warping the horizon into a wavering line of brass. Horses twitched beneath the hitching posts, tails flicking at flies, too stubborn to die. The smell of sweat, old whiskey, and iron nails hung in the air like a curse. Rowan Doyle walked through it all in silence, his boots stirring small ghosts of dust with each step. He had the look of a man who'd ridden too far and seen too much coat frayed at the cuffs, hat sweat-stained, a week's worth of stubble cutting the edge of his jaw. But it was his right hand that drew the eye, a pale scar, shaped like an X burned into the flesh just below the thumb. Years ago, a branding iron had made it. Once, he'd been a soldier under Sergeant Luther Kane, a man who taught mercy was weakness and obedience. The only virtue, Rowan had believed that once, until the night Kane ordered him to burn an Apache village as punishment, until he saw what mercy truly cost. The scar was Kane's lesson, his reminder. Don't forget what softness brings. He hadn't forgotten, but he hadn't forgiven either. Now he worked for whoever paid in cash or whiskey, herding cattle, mending fences, sleeping under roofs that didn't belong to him. He'd learned to keep his words short and his heart quiet. The girl followed him that day, barefoot and silent, her steps leaving faint prints on the scorched ground. Her name, he would learn later, was Tiva, daughter of a Chiricahua healer who'd once been known across the valley for curing snakebite and fever with smoke and song. Her village was gone now, turned to ash under Kane's orders. She was small but unyielding, her skin sun-burnished, her eyes black as obsidian and just as sharp. The dried blood on her temple had cracked, yet she carried herself upright, even proud. Around her neck hung a small bone pendant, carved into the shape of swirling wind, the mark of her people's healers. When Rowan handed her a canteen, she didn't reach for it. "You think water makes us even?" she asked, her English clipped but clear. "No," he said, "but you'll die faster without it." She took it then, drinking carefully, like someone who'd been betrayed by generosity before. They left Dry Hollow behind as laughter faded into the wind. The town shrank into a haze of red dust, swallowed by the horizon. Ahead lay the dragoons' ridges of stone rising like broken teeth, the kind of land that made a man earn every breath. Rowan rode ahead on his bay gelding. Tiva followed on a borrowed mare that moved uneasy under her light frame. Neither spoke for a long time. The only sound was the creak of leather and the faint rattle of a loose stirrup bolt. By the time the sun slid west, the light had turned the desert into molten copper. They camped by a dry wash, the air heavy with the scent of sage and mesquite. Rowan built a small fire, small enough not to be seen, big enough to keep the night animals away. Tiva sat a few feet from the flames, her face half in shadow. "You shouldn't have interfered," she said after a long silence. "I've been told that before," Rowan replied, staring into the fire. "They'll come for you. They always do." Her eyes flickered toward the mark on his hand, the pale cross catching the firelight. She said nothing, but her expression tightened recognition. Maybe. Or the ghost of something she couldn't yet name. When he finally lay back against his saddle, the stars stretched endless above them, sharp and bright as glass, somewhere far off. A coyote, called. Tiva's voice came soft through the dark. My father said the wind remembers every word ever spoken to it. Rowan turned his head slightly. What's it remember about us? She looked into the fire, her lashes trembling with the glow. That one of us owes the other more than life. Neither spoke again. The wind moved through the canyons, whispering in a tongue older than both of them. By dawn, the fire had burned itself to a circle of gray ash. Rowan saddled the horses without a word, his movements steady, deliberate. Tiva watched him from a few steps away, her wrists still raw where the rope had cut through. She had tied them with strips of cloth torn from her skirt, but the blood had seeped through again. When he noticed, he held out a small tin of salve. For that, she hesitated, eyes narrowing. Why? Because I've seen wounds like that turn black, he said, his tone flat, almost weary. And I don't care to bury another person because of someone else's cruelty. Her jaw tensed. I'm not your responsibility. Didn't say you were. She took the tin without another word. When she opened it, the faint smell of pine resin and tallow drifted up, homemade. Practical, nothing more. Yet as she dabbed the salve onto her wrists, she realized how long it had been since anyone had offered her something without expecting obedience in return. They rode through the morning in silence. The land unfolded in shades of ochre and gold, low hills dotted with ocotillo, the distant cliffs of the dragoons gleaming like bronze. Overhead, hawks circled, their shadows sliding across the sand. Around noon, they stopped near a patch of mesquite for shade. Rowan watered the horses, then handed Tiva a strip of jerky and half a biscuit. She didn't touch them at first. You afraid I poisoned it? He asked. I'm not hungry. He shrugged, taking a bite of his own. Sout yourself. For a long while, only the creak of the saddle leather and the dry rattle of grass filled the air. Then, without looking at him, she said quietly, You were a soldier. His hand paused mid-air. Who told you that I saw the way you move? You still look for ambushes that aren't there. He gave a low grunt. Old habits slow. Did you fight for Cain? She asked, her voice sharper now. Rowan's eyes lifted, and something unreadable flickered in them. Once, she turned away, the air between them heavy. He didn't explain, and she didn't ask again. That evening, they reached the edge of a dried creek bed. The ground was cracked and white, littered with sun-bleached stones. Rowan dismounted, scanning the horizon. We'll rest here tonight. Tiva slid off the mare, wincing slightly. Her bare feet were cut and bruised, but she made no sound. She knelt beside the sand, tracing small circles with her fingertips. After a moment, she began to dig, slow and steady. What are you doing? Rowan asked. Finding water. There's none here. She kept digging. The land hides it. You just don't know where to look. A few minutes later, damp earth darkened under her hands. Rowan blinked, almost in disbelief. She pressed her palms deeper until a thin thread of water seeped up from the sand. There, she murmured, even in dead ground, something breathes. He knelt beside her, scooping a handful to his lips. The water tasted of iron and dust, but it was cold. You learned that from your father, Tiva nodded. He taught me to listen to what the wind hides. Water, roots, voice. What does the wind say now? She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. That you don't listen anymore. For a moment, neither moved. The desert was utterly still, the kind of silence that made every heartbeat feel like a confession. Then Rowan stood, brushing the sand from his hands. Maybe I stopped hearing because there's nothing left worth listening to. Tiva didn't answer. She rose and walked a few paces away, her silhouette cutting against the fading light. When night came, she sat by the fire, the flame flickering in her eyes like shards of memory. Rowan leaned back against his saddle, watching her from the corner of his vision. The mark on his hand caught the firelight, glowing faintly like a brand still hot. She noticed it again. That scar? She said quietly. It looks familiar. He flexed his fingers. It should. Your people gave me a reason for it. Her gaze sharpened. Then maybe you earned it. Maybe I did. The words hung between them, brittle as dry twigs. Later, when she thought he'd fallen asleep, Tiva whispered to the night, "My father said the wind remembers every wound ever made on this land." Rowan's voice came from the dark, low and rough. "Then I guess it remembers me too." The fire popped softly, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled far beyond the hills, distant, uncertain, like a promise still waiting to be kept. The next days stretched long and wordless, a rhythm of hoofbeats and heat. The land between Dry Hollow and the Dragoons was a scab of stone and sand. Nothing gentle survived there. Cactus skeletons reached toward the sky like the hands of drowned men. The wind rasped dry through mesquite thorns. But together, they pressed on. Rowan rode ahead, his posture easy, but his eyes never still. He read the land the way other men read scripture, looking for signs of danger, change, betrayal. Behind him, Tiva followed at a steady pace, her braid whipping with the wind. She didn't ask where they were going, and he didn't tell her. At midday, they stopped by a cluster of rocks. Rowan slid from the saddle, stretched his shoulders, and glanced toward the girl. "You ride well," he said. "I've done it since I could walk." So, my father raised horses. They knew our voices." He gave a faint smile. "Most men don't listen that close to anything." She looked at him for a moment, as if measuring whether to speak again. Then she said, "Your horse trusts you. That means something." Rowan snorted. Maybe he's just too tired to argue. He turned to check his pack, but her words stayed with him longer than he wanted to admit. That evening, a sharp wind blew down from the mountains, carrying the smell of rain that wouldn't come. Rowan crouched near the fire, rubbing oil into the leather of his saddle. Tiva sat across from him, grinding leaves into a paste on a flat rock. "What's that for?" he asked. "For wounds," she said, without looking up. "Yucca sap and prickly pear juice. Stops infection." He nodded, uninterested at first. But when she reached over and dabbed the mixture on his shoulder, he froze. He hadn't realized she'd noticed the tear in his shirt, the raw scrape beneath. "You should have said something," she murmured. "Didn't think it mattered." "Everything matters," she said. "Even small hurts fester when ignored." Her hands were sure and gentle. For the first time in years, he didn't flinch at another's touch. When she was done, she wiped her fingers on her skirt and leaned back, eyes turned toward the flames. Rowan stared at the fire, then at her. "You're not afraid of me anymore." "I am," she said softly. But fear isn't always reason enough to run. The night deepened around them, thick with crickets and the whisper of wind through cholla spines. Rowan rolled a cigarette, then let it burn down without lighting it. The smell of crushed tobacco mingled with the smoke of the fire, sharp, human, oddly comforting. He spoke at last. "You ever think about going back to where your people were?" Tiva shook her head. "There's no back, only what the land remembers." He studied her profile, the strong line of her jaw, the eyes that seemed older than her years. "You talk about the land like it's alive." "It is," she said simply. "It watches. It forgives slower than we do." A long pause stretched between them. Then Rowan said, "If that's true, I hope it's forgotten me by now." Tiva's voice came quiet but certain. "It hasn't." The wind picked up, tossing sparks upward like orange stars. For a while neither spoke, and in that silence something shifted, not quite trust, not yet forgiveness, but the first stirrings of both. They crossed into the foothills the next morning, where the desert gave way to scattered grass and thorny shrubs. The air smelled faintly of sage and wet stone. At one point the path narrowed into a rocky pass, the sound of hooves echoing off the cliffs. Rowan slowed his horse. "Keep close," he said. "I can take care of myself." "Didn't say you couldn't, but I've seen this canyon swallow better riders." Her retort was cut short by the crack of falling rock. A startled horse reared. Rowan grabbed the reins before it bolted, pulling the animal back just in time. Dust filled the air, choking and dry. When it settled, Tiva's mare stood trembling, one hoof bleeding where a sharp edge had sliced the skin. Hold her steady, Rowan said. He crouched, cleaning the wound with water from his canteen, then tore a strip from his shirt to bandage it. His hands were rough, but his movements were careful. Tiva watched, her lips pressed together. You're good with pain, she said finally. Had practice. He glanced up at her. Yours or others? He didn't answer. They continued until dusk, the cliffs catching the sun like red glass. Rowan found a small hollow sheltered by boulders and decided they'd stop there for the night. Tiva gathered dry twigs and built a fire while he unsaddled the horses. When he came back, she was sitting cross-legged by the flames, humming something low and rhythmic. What's that song? It's for travelers, she said, so they won't lose their way. He tilted his head. Think it works. Her smile was faint but real. You're here, aren't you? Something in him softened at that. For a fleeting moment, Rowan let himself imagine what peace might feel like if it ever decided to stay. Later, as he lay staring up at the stars, her voice came through the darkness. Why did you help me? He thought for a long time before answering. Because once, someone tried to help me. I failed them. Maybe this was my turn to do it right. The fire cracked softly, casting gold over her face. She looked away, but he saw it, the faint tremor at the corner of her mouth. The first hint of warmth breaking through old frost. And somewhere in the night, thunder murmured again over the dragoons. Closer now, as if the sky itself was drawing breath. The third morning brought wind from the east, hot, restless, carrying a veil of dust that dimmed the horizon. Tiva's mare balked against it, uneasy, ears twitching. Rowan sensed it too. The wind carried something heavier than sand. Trouble. By midday, the storm arrived. The sky folded over itself in a dull, copper haze, and the air turned electric. Rowan urged his horse toward a narrow ravine. We'll wait it out there. Tiva followed, her scarf pulled tight against her face. Sand lashed their skin like needles, and every breath burned dry. They pressed the horses into a shallow cave and crouched in the dark while the storm howled through the world outside. Rowan's hat brim trembled with the wind. His voice barely rose above the roar. You've been quiet all day. I listen when the earth screams, she said. It warns us. Of what? Her eyes gleamed faintly in the half-light. Of men who think they can own it. He didn't reply. The storm thundered for hours, and with each blast, Rowan felt the old weight in his chest, the one that had chased him since the night of the fire years ago. The air smelled of dust and ash, just as it had then. When the wind finally fell silent, the world outside was colorless, coated in grit. Rowan stepped out first. Scanning the empty plain, we move fast, he said. Kane's men will have caught our trail by now. They rode until sunset. The sky glowed orange, bleeding into violet. Then the shot came sharp, distant, unmistakable. Rowan twisted in the saddle. Down Tiva slid off her mare, crouching behind a boulder as bullets bit into the dirt nearby. Rowan fired back twice, hitting the rim of a hill to scatter them. Keep low, the gunfire died as quickly as it began. Dust drifted through the air. He heard the echo of hooves retreating east. Kane's men weren't finished. They were marking the distance, circling for later. They found shelter under an overhang of rock as twilight fell. Rowan checked his revolver, jaw clenched. He's not letting go. Kane, he doesn't forget disobedience. Tiva tied her horse, then turned to him. You disobeyed him once before. Yeah, he said quietly. And he branded me for it. Her gaze fell to the scar on his hand. For the first time, she reached toward it. Why did you do it? He hesitated. He ordered us to burn a village near the San Pedro. Said they were raiders. I thought I was following orders. Until I saw... His voice thinned. Until I saw a woman run back into the fire for her child. Tiva's breath caught. And the man with the torch, Rowan looked at her. The truth rising like smoke. Me. The silence between them grew vast. She stepped back, shaking her head. I saw you, she whispered. That night, you were the one they said was merciful. Merciful. His laugh was bitter. I lit the fire, Tiva. But you came back. You pulled one child from the flames. He froze. Her voice trembled. That child was me. The confession tore through the air. Outside, thunder rolled again over the dragoons, low and mournful. Rowan's face went pale beneath the dust. Then everything I've done since hasn't been enough. Tiva's eyes shone wet but fierce. Nothing you do can bring them back, but you don't have to burn forever. He turned away, gripping his saddle horn as if it might steady him. You think forgiveness changes what I did? No, she said. It changes what you'll become. The night deepened around them. Rain began to fall, a strange, stinging drizzle that barely wet the ground before vanishing again. They didn't move until dawn. The next day, Rowan woke up feverish. His shirt clung to his back, soaked in cold sweat. He muttered names she didn't know. Words like, "Don't burn it," and "They're still inside." Tiva pressed a damp cloth to his forehead. The scar on his hand pulsed red like an ember. She ground herbs with her knife, mixed them with water, and forced a few drops between his lips. "You will not die in this desert," she said, more command than plea. When he finally stirred, eyes cloudy with fever, she was still beside him. "I heard you in your sleep," she said softly. "You begged for the fire to stop." He looked away. "Too late for that." She studied him for a long moment. "You carry Cain's mark, but his mark is not your soul." He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. Later that afternoon, Cain's men found them. 2 riders appeared over the ridge, rifles glinting. Rowan pushed Tiva toward the rocks. "Stay down," he drew his Colt and fired, dropping one of them. The second charged. The shot grazed Rowan's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Before he could rise, Tiva snatched his revolver. Her hands trembled, but she aimed true. The gun kicked once clean, sharp, and the man fell. When the silence came back, it was total. Rowan sat up slowly, pressing his hand to the bleeding wound. "You could have left me," he said hoarsely. She wiped the blood from her cheek. "The land wouldn't forgive me if I did." He managed a faint, crooked smile. "You sound like your father." She nodded. "Then maybe you should start listening." That night, the storm finally broke for good. Lightning split the horizon, and rain came down in sheets, flooding the dry washes. They found a shallow rise and built a small fire beneath a ledge. The flames threw gold across their faces, his weary, hers resolute. Neither spoke for a long time. When Rowan finally did, his voice was barely audible above the rain. "I should have died with them." Tiva looked into the fire. "No, you lived to face what you did. That's the harder thing." He met her gaze across the flames, and for the first time, there was no barrier between them, only the quiet understanding of 2 people who had both been broken by the same fire, and somehow, impossibly, still breathing. Outside, the rain hissed against the stone. It didn't wash away the past, but it soaked the dust that had buried it. By dawn, the storm had moved east, leaving the air washed clean and sharp. The desert smelled of wet stone and creosote, a scent so rare it felt almost holy. Mist clung to the hollows of the hills, and the horses shook water from their coats, snorting into the chill. Rowan stirred the ashes of their fire, half expecting to find nothing but steam. His shoulder ached where the bullet had torn through, the bandage already soaked through with blood and rain. He tried to stand, but Tiva pressed him back down. "Stay still," she said. "I'm fine. Lies don't stop bleeding." She knelt beside him, mixing a gray paste of ash and yucca sap on a flat stone. The smell was bitter, but clean. She pressed it into the wound, steady and unflinching, then bound it tight with a strip torn from her shawl. "You learned that from your mother?" he asked. "Yes," she said, tying the knot. She could heal anything but fire. The words sank deep. Rowan stared at her hands, at the care in them, and thought of how those same hands had once clawed through smoke to survive what he'd helped unleash. Shame rose like heat behind his ribs. When she was done, she sat back, her hair heavy with moisture, strands clinging to her face. "We're close to Cain's trail," she said. He won't stop until you're dead. Rowan gave a faint, humorless smile. He wants to finish what he started. Then we finish it first, she said simply. He looked at her, small, fierce, unbending, and felt something shift. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But a direction. They packed what they could and rode northwest through the foothills, following the scars the storm had left in the land. The ground was soft, dark, alive again. For the first time in years, Rowan noticed how green could hide beneath brown, how even a dead yucca could bloom after rain. By afternoon, they reached a canyon. From its mouth rose the smell of smoke and the echo of voices. Kane's camp. Rowan counted 3 horses, maybe 4. He felt the old instinct coil inside him, the soldier's reflex. His fingers brushed the revolver on his hip. Tiva caught the motion. "You mean to kill him?" He hesitated. "What would you do?" "I'd free the women he holds," she said. "Then let the earth decide his fate." Her answer struck something raw in him. He nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." The sun dipped low as they crept into the canyon. Rowan's shoulder throbbed, his vision dim at the edges, but he moved with quiet precision. Tiva's footsteps were soundless, her body merging with the shadows. They found the prisoners near the fire pit, 4 women, Apache like her, wrists bound, faces hollow from exhaustion. When they saw Tiva, a flicker of life stirred in their eyes. Rowan cut their ropes with his knife. "Go," he whispered. "Head north. Follow the riverbed." One woman touched Tiva's arm before leaving, murmuring something in their language, half blessing, half warning. But the movement stirred the camp. A guard turned, saw them, shouted. Rowan fired once, the sound cracking through the canyon like thunder. Chaos erupted. He dropped another man before a bullet tore across his side, spinning him to the ground. Tiva seized his arm, dragging him behind a crate. Blood poured between his fingers, but he forced himself upright, firing again. Then it was quiet. Only the rainwater dripping from the cliffs broke the silence. Tiva pressed her palm over his wound, trembling. "You're bleeding too much." He gritted his teeth. "You saved them. That's what matters." "I didn't want to lose you too." Her voice cracked, the first break in her composure since he'd met her. He caught her wrist weakly. "You can't lose what you never had." She looked at him, eyes fierce through the tears. "Then let me have it now." For a long moment, neither spoke. The desert wind passed between them, carrying the scent of rain and gunpowder. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "My mother said the land remembers kindness," she whispered. He closed his eyes. "Then I hope it remembers mine before it's done with me." She smiled faintly. "It will. I'll make sure of it." They stayed there until the sky began to darken, until the wind turned cool again. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled, a last echo of the storm that had washed them clean. That night, as Rowan dozed against the canyon wall, pain dulling his sense, Tiva watched the last light fade from the west. The women were free. Kane's men were gone. But she knew he would come himself now, because men like him couldn't bear to lose control. And when he did, she would be ready. She glanced at Rowan, the man who once carried fire and now carried its scar, and whispered to the wind in her language, "Let him live long enough to see the rain fall again." The wind moved through the rocks, low and steady. As if it answered, night crawled over the dragoons like a black tide. The wind had gone still, the kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. In the canyon below, a single campfire burned, a pale orange eye staring through the dark. Kane was there. Tiva watched from the ridge above, the bow in her hands steady. Beside her, Rowan leaned against a boulder, his shirt stiff with dried blood. The fever had faded, but his eyes burned with a clearer fire now. "He'll come for you," she whispered. "He always does," Rowan said. "But this time, I'm not running." He checked his revolver, spun the cylinder once, and holstered it again. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, at the defiance in her eyes, the steadiness in her breath. "If I don't walk back out of that canyon," she cut him off. "Don't say that. You keep going. Find your mother. The women need you more than I do. I decide what I need, she said, voice hard as stone. Rowan almost smiled. You sound just like the wind. Then he rose, and together they descended into the canyon. Cain was waiting by the fire, his boots planted wide, the barrel of his rifle gleaming in the light. Age had thickened him gray in the beard, but the same cruel curve to his mouth. Around him, the remaining men stood uneasy. The smell of whiskey and fear hung heavy in the air. Well, Cain drawled, look what the dust dragged in. My branded dog and his squaw. Rowan didn't answer. He stepped forward, hands loose at his sides. You never did learn your place. Doyle, Cain said, voice thick with mockery. Did you forget what happens to men who cross me? Rowan's voice came quiet, cold. No, I remember every scream. Cain laughed, harsh and sharp. You think freeing a few savages makes you clean. Rowan took another step closer. No, but killing you might make the world a little quieter. That was all it took. Cain lifted his rifle. The world shrank to the space between the hammer and the trigger. But before he could fire, lightning ripped across the sky, blinding white, and thunder cracked so loud it made the horses rear. In that heartbeat of chaos, Cain's finger twitched. His shot went wide. One of his own men, startled, fired back by mistake. The bullet struck Cain clean through the chest. For a moment he just stared down at the wound, disbelief twisting his features. Then he staggered backward, dropped his rifle, and fell into the mud. Rain began to fall slow, heavy drops that hissed as they hit the fire. Tiva lowered her bow. Rowan hadn't moved. He just stood over Cain's body, the rain darkening his coat, washing streaks of blood and dust from his face. Cain's breath rattled once more. Mercy, that's your weakness, he rasped. Rowan looked down at him. No, he said softly. That's what saved me. Cain's eyes glazed, his head tilting into the mud. The rain swallowed the last of his breath. By dawn with Frun, the canyon had turned to a river of silver water. Smoke rose from the dying fire, curling into the mist. Rowan sat beneath an overhang, his revolver lying in the mud beside him. Tiva stood nearby, staring at the horizon where the mountains glowed pale under the first sunlight. It's over, she said. Rowan shook his head. It never really is. But it's Keter now. She walked to him, holding out her hand. Come. There's someone you need to meet. They rode through the morning mist toward the high ridge above the valley. There, hidden among the rocks, stood an old mission, half collapsed, vines growing through the roof beams. Smoke rose from a small fire near the doorway. An old woman waited there, hair silver, one eye clouded with blindness. When Tiva dismounted, the woman's hands trembled toward her. Ella Nantan. Tiva whispered the name, trembling with both fear and hope. Her mother reached forward, fingers finding her daughter's face. The wind said you were still alive, she murmured. Rowan turned away, giving them space. But he could hear the soft sound of their reunion words in Apache that rolled like prayer. When Ella Nantan finally looked toward him, her blind eye caught the light, gleaming like a pearl. You carry the mark of fire, she said. Yes, ma'am. Then let the rain wash it clean. She took his burned hand and pressed her thumb to the scar. The air seemed to tremble, a single drop of water falling onto his skin. Rowan swallowed hard, unable to speak. That evening, when the storm returned, he and Tiva stood on the ridge. The land below shimmered with wet light, the desert breathing again after years of drought. Tiva held something in her palm, 5 old silver coins, tarnished from years of dust. She stepped closer and placed them in Rowan's hand. For the day you bought me, she said, or maybe for the day you bought back your mercy. He looked at the coins, their dull shine catching the fading light. I didn't buy anything, she smiled faintly. That's why I'm giving it back. He closed his hand over hers, the coins cold between their palms. The rain fell harder, washing over them both. Down in the valley, thunder rolled once more, but softer now, like a drumbeat fading into peace. Tiva turned her face to the sky, eyes half closed. "The earth breathes again," she whispered. Rowan looked at her, rain streaking his face. And for the first time in years, he believed her. They mounted their horses, side by side, and rode west through the wet grass, their shadows long against the gleaming earth. Behind them, the dragoons shone red and gold under the last light. That year, Arizona saw its first rain after 7 summers of dust. And those who passed through Dry Hollow swore they could still hear it, the sound of a woman's song carried on the wind, and the faint rhythm of a hammer striking metal. Steady as a heartbeat,